Someone recently said, as soon as I read these words, I messaged my best friend and said, if the time comes, this is what you have to read at my funeral.
This was your poem, your words.
Yeah. What's happening at the moment with poetry, which is, I think is really great, is that it doesn't have to have rules. It's just feelings. And if it's got meaning to you, I bet there is somebody out there who resonates with it as well.
You seem to be a really great example of which you can find a bit of a passion and let that door open. You can help your mind release something that's deep within itself.
Sometimes I don't even recognise that I'm feeling those feelings. I can't even understand or process in my mind that that is what's happening, and then it comes out and I go, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You've told me before that many ideas can come in dreams for you.
I wake up and I know I've got something in my mind and I almost feel it in my chest. I do struggle to understand the processes that I take because I am neurodivergent. Reciting words in my mind focuses me more than anything else.
But there's another side of you.
In like modern times, people don't want to have a traditional wedding. They want to have a wedding that's more meaningful and more personal to them. So people choose to have celebrants who write and officiate just as a registrar would, but they're allowed to write something extremely personal and meaningful.
Well, if you don't mind, let's hear a poem.
Okay.
Recently, this podcast celebrated its first birthday, and I'm incredibly proud of the foundations that I've laid in the first set of episodes. I want to thank you so much for listening. It means so much and has given me confidence to know this is something that can continue going forward. And as the podcast evolves, I want to make sure it can be sustainable for the future. And part of that evolution will inevitably include some form of commercial partnership. It's still very early days and it may take some time, but this is something I want to explore in the podcast's second year. Until then, I might try and be a bit creative and experiment with a few things. Some of it may work, some of it may not, so do bear with me. I live a nomadic lifestyle and I'm never in one place for too long. So from time to time, I find it very convenient to order groceries in the form of a Gusto box. I've been using Gusto for nearly 5 years now. It's a delivery company that sends you fresh food and all the ingredients you need to cook delicious meals at home, along with very easy to follow recipe cards. They have over 90 recipes every week, so there really is something for everyone. And so many of their recipes I've returned to again and again because their meals are just delicious. I've got a referral code. I've shared it with so many of my friends. It means they get cheap groceries on their first few boxes and I get credit in return. I'll link it below. Use it to sign up and you get a pretty hefty discount off your first box. There's no subscription required and you can order just one box whenever you want. Glastonbury Festival 2023, last year, was the first time I had gone to Glastonbury on my own.
Okay.
I was volunteering with Oxfam and it was the last day, the Sunday, when I had worked my shifts. I'd had some time enjoying the festival and I was gearing up ready to go and get a good position for Sir Elton John for the finale, when I had a bit of free time to go do some souvenir shopping. And I'm not one for material objects, but from seeing around the festival over those days that there were these festival postcards, I thought it'd be great to try and send some of the family members one. And so I went straight to that tent when I had the time, which is where I found this beautiful print with lots of words on it and a small little illustration, which was titled Glastonbury Festival. And I pulled it off the shelf and I stood there for a minute or two reading it. And it was a poem by yourself. And there was something about whether or not I was super tired or super emotional or a bit of both. But it really resonated with me about the spirit of a festival, the freedom that you get and you have, and the love for each other and the celebration of life and coming together. And by the end of this poem, I was in tears. And so I had to buy a few and send them to family and keep one for myself, which is what I've got here. This was your poem, your words.
Yeah. It's quite amazing, really, that so many people since that was printed at Glastonbury have reached out to me and said what it meant to them. Someone recently said, as soon as I read these words, I messaged my best friend and said, if the time comes, this is what you have to read at my funeral. And I thought, like, wow, what more of a compliment, or, you know, how much, it can't get any better, not better, but I can't, you know, that can't be a bigger compliment than that. If someone says this sums up everything that I think about my life. And so thank you. Yeah. A lot of people did say it brought them to tears. I love Glastonbury. It was my 12th year. So you said it was your first year. It was my 12th year going. And you said it might have been being tired or emotional, but I just think it's Glasgow magic, or the festival magic, where you do meet so many like-minded people. It's very rare. Well, you can stay in those circles, but it's very rare that you're for 1 week, you're with people that think like you, who want to be free, who don't have the constraints of work, only if you want to. And yeah, you're just free to be who you want to be without any rules.
Well, if you don't mind, let's hear the poem.
Yeah. It's entitled Glastonbury on that, but in my book it's My Kind of Heaven. If I die and I'm lucky to see heaven, don't give me white clouds. I don't want a palace in the sky or gods and goddesses wrapped in golden shrouds. I don't want paradise with angels playing the harp or eating grapes. I don't need luxuries or silky embellished drapes. No, I think I want to dance forever with sequin nipples in muddy grounds. I want to float forever, head and shoulders above the crowds. If I die and I see heaven, don't give me pearly gates. I want to live forever at a festival with my mates. I don't need a porcelain walkway or an ivory throne. I'll take a portaloo any day to call a festival my home. And maybe I'll be fancy and rest my head in a yurt, but we'll sit round that campsite like we always do, laughing till it hurts. I'll take sweaty backs, I'll take achy feet, to have that bass in my face forever as we shout I love you on repeat. I don't need a chalice or a goblet for my wine. I'll take a warm beer and a weird mixer every time. I want to shimmy across fields in a land of no rules, wearing glitter every day and silly fancy dress costumes. Because heaven is a place where women wear and say whatever the fuck they choose, and men can cry and share a hug to the drop of their favourite tunes. I won't need to bathe in a waterfall of crystal blue. I have baby wipes and a spray of deodorant will do. I'll talk to strangers like they're my best friends. Just let me live forever, where fun and freedom never ends.
I think you really encapsulated everything that a festival is, getting in the field, back to basics. Finding that freedom, because we feel so constrained in our lives, in our normal lives, with our usual regime and our and having to feel like we need to fit in like cogs in a machine. But suddenly when you're let loose on a field with your best mates and loads of music going on, everything becomes free.
Exactly. It's the one time in the year that I look forward to to feel I can just not have to think about anything other than having fun with my favourite people, and with no structure, no routine, just not having to think about anything else but having a good time. And yeah, you don't have to worry about what you look like or things like that. You just feel comfortable and happy.
And accepted.
And accepted. And exactly. And included, and all those things.
So you must have gone quite an adventure in getting your poem to Glastonbury Festival. Not just in, I think there's a competition every year that people can submit to, which is how you were able to get and win this competition. Yeah. But even before that, there's been years of putting yourself out there online and holding yourself accountable to writing and producing and publishing content.
Yeah.
That must have been quite an adventure itself.
Yeah. So I guess, so I began sharing my work in probably 2019, just before COVID happened. I started sharing some poetry I would go to spoken word events. I was writing, I was going to spoken word events, but I hadn't written for many, many years. So I wrote a lot when I was very young, when I was going through secondary school. But for about 10 years, it just wasn't a part of my life. And then I had a big breakup. I was with somebody for 10 years and we broke up. And I started really writing again. And then I went to spoken word events, and then lockdown happened, and everyone started posting things online, and I thought, I'll do this. And people started to like my videos and said, I really like this poem. And that felt kind of good. And then I really wrote I got the feel for it then, and I wrote quite a lot in quite a short space of time. They just kind of seemed to, I think maybe it felt good, so it just came to me.
Well, you talked about how you used to write when you were younger, and I've seen some of your writings when you were a child almost. I think there was one that you published on your socials when you were 8 years old, which was a beautifully written poem for someone who's 8 years old.
I know. I don't remember. Some of them I don't remember, but I'm quite shocked by the quality of it.
Were you aware of your talent at that time, or was it just something you just did?
I was always told I was a very good writer from a young age, but I don't remember that. I don't think I recognised in myself that quite like how unusual it is to write things like that when you were that age, when you were that young. I don't think I recognised that when I was younger. But it's interesting because my dad writes a lot of poetry, but we didn't live together growing up. And I always find it quite interesting that I definitely have. He always used to send poems or write poems to me, but I didn't really grow up around him writing poems. But there's definitely something within. I don't know if it's hereditary or genetics, because it's this nature-nurture argument, but I definitely must have got that from him, because he's, it's so similar in the way that we write and think about poems and stuff. So I don't know if that was part of it from a young age.
You've clearly got a natural talent for it. And in that time when you weren't writing and publishing, was there anything formulating in your mind that you kind of were curious with? Or was it just completely sidelined?
It's such a funny thing to put your finger on, because it does feel like it's just something innate, something natural that just comes and goes. It's not like I do anything particularly to like kind of nurture it. I mean, I guess I have been around a lot of spoken word, which does naturally, in recent years, that does naturally nurture it, and maybe I wasn't back then. But it just kind of, I can actually remember the first poem that I wrote after about 10 years of not writing at all. And I just woke up in the middle, it was 4 a.m. and I woke up in the middle of the night and I wrote this poem, and it wasn't a sad poem. It was a nostalgia piece.
This was on Rusholme?
Rusholme, yeah.
This is where you're from in Manchester.
And that's where I'm from, in Manchester. And maybe because it was a sad period of my life, but maybe I just wanted to go back to a happy place. And I wrote it at 4 a.m. and I remember just sitting up, grabbing a piece of pen and paper, and I hadn't done this for many years. And I wrote this poem and I thought, that's quite good. I like that. And I sent it to my friends and they were like, we really like that.
And when you say you wrote this poem, did it all just completely flow out at 4 a.m.?
It literally just came out.
And then you woke up the next morning and then you were like, there is a poem. I don't need to do anything else to it. It's just spilled out of my mind onto paper.
Exactly.
Because so many people who are writers, the writing process is a constant writing and rewriting and shaping and forming. And that's how I write it's just that my first ever draft of something is horrible, but that's when you can then sculpt it into something better. It gives you the skeleton.
I mean, that does happen. And some things I write, some things now it's not pen and paper, it's in my phone notes and I look at it and I don't even remember that I've put this down and I think, what the hell was that about? Or what does that mean? So sometimes it works out that it's just a finished piece straight away. And other times you just think, where's that come from? Or what does that even mean? Or,
So you woke up that morning after spilling out your mind.
Yeah.
And you had this formed poem of nostalgia.
Yeah.
You'd surprised yourself. You'd woken up in the middle of the night, unaware where the inspiration had come from.
Completely.
What did that poem do going forward?
I guess that was the start of me starting I guess that was like the catalyst again for me writing. Because it made me feel good. It focused my mind on something else. Then I have a very busy mind anyway. And it was being able to channel that busy mind. And so I began doing more.
Was this at the time of your heartbreak at the time?
Yeah. Well, it must have been within that same year, definitely. Living on my own. So yeah, I was with someone for 10 years and then it just didn't work out the way that we thought it was going to. And he wanted to be somewhere else and I wanted to stay in Manchester and we decided to separate, which was just such a huge thing. I'd grown up with this person, really. We got together at university and spent our whole of our 20s together. And then life was supposed to go one way and it didn't. And that is just such a profound thing to happen. When you, more so that it's like you think your life's going to head one way and it doesn't. And suddenly I was on my own, that I hadn't been on my own. I think that was one of the hardest things. I hadn't been on my own for so long. And I guess finding words was the way I passed a lot of time. I was able to focus all that kind of angst and energy into something that made me feel good or made me understand what I was feeling, I guess.
You seem to be a really great example of how once you can find a bit of a passion and let that door open, the floodgates can come out. Once you kind of figure out how you can focus the mind with what your mind is thinking and how your mind works, because I think we'll come into this as well, because your mind works differently to probably many other people and how they can formulate ideas. It's a great example of how you, just by trying to do something and working out how it can be done, you can help your mind release something that's deep within itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also quite surprising sometimes. We touched on how, like that poem that I wrote, and I was like, oh wow, I've written this poem. But it kind of, sometimes I don't even recognize that I'm feeling those feelings. I can't even understand or process in my mind that is what's happening, and then it comes out on paper, sometimes I don't even write it on paper. Sometimes I'm just saying it. It goes round and round in my mind. And I go, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. that's what's going on. Or, right, you felt this, that's how you feel, and let's make something more positive out of it, or let's be sad about it,
And for someone who also is struggling to process certain events in their life, I kind of believe that, okay, not everyone can be a great poet, but everyone can be a poet.
100%. Oh yeah.
So where does it start for someone? Is it just literally pen and paper? Because can you force it out of you, or should it come?
Well, I think I've recommended to people like yourself to give it a go and write. And I've had people, since I started sharing poetry, I've had friends message me with a poem that they just decided to write. And they never thought they could write a poem. And some of it is like, wow, you bet you've shocked yourself, or I think that's absolutely beautiful. And so, yeah, some are really good. And it doesn't matter if it's like, I think what's happening at the moment with poetry, which is, I think is really great, is that it doesn't have to have rules. It's just feelings on a paper. And if it's got meaning to you, I bet there is somebody out there who resonates with it as well. Because it's just a way of sharing experiences. So in answer to your question, for me, I actually can't sit down and just say, I'm going to write a poem about this. It just hits me. People have asked me to write poems, and I can do it, but so if they've asked me to write poems for their business, or I'm currently writing a poem for a couple for a wedding, and I can do it. But the things that I want, say I've got an idea, I want to write about something. Sometimes I just can't do it. And it's just that I have to wait. I have to wait for it to come. A lot of the time it comes in my sleep or my dreams. I wake up and I'm like, I've got it.
Let's talk about this. This is a really unique way, I think, of visualizing creative work. You've told me before that many ideas can come in dreams for you.
Mainly in dreams, yeah.
Are you seeing words, or are you seeing images?
I've tried to understand this process, because it's like I wake up and I know I've got something in my mind, and I almost feel it in my chest. But it's often a rhythm. It's often like you might notice that a lot of my poems, they don't follow the same kind of structure or the same kind of rhythm, which I think some like a lot of spoken artists have found their niche or their style, whereas mine is a bit kind of all over the place, which is a bit like me. And I'll have a rhythm that I want to follow, and it's like that rhythm fits a feeling or an idea, and I can see the images in my mind. So I guess I do dream the images, but it often goes along with like I say, like a tone or a rhythm that I want to get out.
Let's have a poem, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Let's take one from your book, Bedtime for Overthinkers.
Yeah. Where Pasta Goes.
Okay, let's have Where Pasta Goes.
Okay. I hate my belly. I wish it was flat. No, stop, shut up, don't say that. It's cute and round and just a little bit fat. But it's where pasta goes. And who could hate that?
I love that. Okay, so you've been talking about how poetry just has no rules.
Yeah.
And it can come in all shapes and sizes, and that's obviously what you've got in your book here. You've got poems that are very short and punchy, and a poem could just be a sentence. It could just be a few words.
Yeah.
But it could also be pages and pages that tell a story or tell an emotion.
Yeah.
And it's everything in between as well.
Yeah. I think the hardest poems to write are short ones. They're the hardest because you have to tell a story in only a few lines, and they're the most difficult ones. And so I really like those poems in my book. That I'm quite proud of them ones because they don't come as naturally. It's just like a a little thought, and I'm like, oh, that will make sense to people, or that makes sense. The ones that are stories obviously they serve a different purpose in that people like to listen to a long. I think there's a big spoken word scene now, and people like to listen to these tales that are through longer poems, or like to read stories in rhythm and rhyme. And you can get a lot. You can obviously, there's room to get a lot in there, a lot of detail in there.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. Let's talk about spoken word then.
Yeah.
It's something that you put online with not just poems that are written and for people to read, but also you perform them to camera. You also perform on stages. You've been across Manchester and on tour and different forms performing your poems. Yeah. You are a fantastic performer.
Thank you.
You ooze confidence. There's even sometimes you've not even got words in front of you. It's just all coming from your mind through your mouth.
Yeah.
And you clearly also represent Manchester through your accent as well.
Yeah. Proud of that. So you say I ooze confidence, but that's a really funny thing to hear with somebody who is kind of riddled with anxiety. And you say I'm a natural performer. It's such an interesting. It's such a fascinating quality of, or like part of my personality, that I feel a need to perform and share. I've always felt this need. I did a lot of acting when I was younger, and I've always felt a need to perform. But I am riddled with being a complete overthinker and very self-conscious in lots of ways. So it's a bit of a paradox, really. I don't know. I get a lot from performing live. I love connecting with people and sharing my words and being on stage. And I love to hear that confidence comes. I come across as a confident person because behind closed doors, I'm not generally. So I don't know if there's something in that. I don't know if it's like a way of me.
That's common, I think, with a lot of performers. Yeah. They don't realize, and they also can't see themselves, so they're just kind of in their own head when they're on stage and not necessarily seeing what's coming out. I think as an audience, you will only just judge someone purely by their performance and not necessarily what's going on in their head and what they feel like they could have done better, or what's gone wrong. But I think also like poetry in its live form is, and from the author, is the purest form of poetry.
Yeah, and they're meant to be heard, aren't they? The words are meant to be heard. They're meant to be read, but words are meant to be heard as well. And I write in a very particular. You can hear my voice in my words. I think if you've heard me perform, then you know that the words that I've written are very much kind of you can kind of hear me performing them almost. Or I write the way that I would say them, essentially. That's where it doesn't, like we talked about, it doesn't follow a structure. It's just the way that I would say it out loud. And yeah, spoken words opened up loads of doors for me. I've met I didn't know that it existed, but there's a huge poetry scene in Manchester, huge spoken word. It's become very popular in recent years. I mean, I don't know if it was always popular, but I think particularly now, there are more people sharing words on stage and people going to listen to, rather than thinking, oh, poetry's like, what we were taught at GCSE or
like war poetry.
it's kind of a different form now.
And I mean, we can talk briefly on this, but poetry in schools is never the most inspiring.
No.
And hearing your poem, and we'll hear some more later as well, is there's so much colour, even if it's shaded with darkness in the words that you write. And studying poems from the 1940s about men in trenches, as much as it is very horrific, and I suppose there's the study of language within that and the power of words.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily kind of inspire that generation to want to write themselves.
No. It can actually have the opposite effect in that it makes young people think they can't access poetry. What we're taught in school. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there is some amazing poetry that they study in schools, but I don't think much of the curriculum these days is relatable to the UK demographic or the young people that are in schools nowadays. And it can actually alienate a lot of young writers because they feel that that's the way that they should, that's the only way to write, and it's not true. So it's I think it's amazing that there are scenes with outside of school or or places like that celebrate poetry in different ways.
And where can people find spoken word in their local area? It's just a case of Googling it. Instagram.
It's a good question, that actually, because I guess you'd have to be within that kind of way, that algorithm or whatever to find it.
It's a lesser known, popular kind of type of evening out, really. You've got your comedy clubs, you've got your theatre and cinema, but spoken word is equally as engaging, if not more.
I agree.
I've seen so many bad comics. It's rare you'd find a bad poem, I think.
Well, that's it. And you can have a lot of comedy. We have a lot of comedy in poems as well. It's quite interesting, actually. We, especially in the North, we have very self-deprecating humour. So a lot of the poets in Manchester are comics. They use comedy to share their emotions and their feelings. And I noticed this I had an event. I was at an event that had guests from spoken word artists from London and spoken word artists from Manchester. And that difference kind of occurred to me when somebody said, "Oh, it's quite interesting." They were a poet from London. It's quite interesting. We all talk about the same things almost, but you Mancunians always want to make it funny. We're like, yeah, I think that's how we do kind of. We often rely on humour to deal with the sad things in our lives. But yeah, and you can. I guess I am within that. I'm within that circle of knowing where events are. But if you wanted to go and find it, I would. There are so many events. Saying is an event that is on frequently in Manchester, and they've been amazing in promoting some of the best new poets on the scene. So I would definitely look that up on Instagram. Saying, but there are many others as well, like Verbose or just look on Instagram for spoken word events and you'll find them. There's many promoting them.
Well, speaking of humour in poetry, I think we should have something where you've used that to the best extent.
Yeah.
How about Call Me a Pussy?
Okay. Call me a pussy. Stop being a pussy. You need to grow some balls. Man up, you girl. Yep, we've heard it all before. Well, I've got news. You've been saying it all wrong. Balls are weak and pussies are strong. Don't believe me? Go and ask your mum. They push out humans that grow to 7 feet long. Balls are sensitive, they hurt to touch. Pussies take a pounding and lads often too much. Not to mention the blood. Vaginas face without making a fuss. Bleeding constantly and still turning up for work. If you can't call it pussy power, then there's still a lot to learn. But for now, if you're going to call names, just think about what you say. Because if you called me a pussy, you might just make my day.
Within your themes of your poetry,
yeah,
you've talked about your heartbreak, but there's also love, there's friendship, there's partying, there's loss, there's nostalgia. There's also political frustration. So much you write about is slaying the Tories as well. Has this come from like being in the Red Wall type of district?
I guess growing up in Manchester, yeah. We don't tend to like Tories in Manchester, and just witnessing what the Tory government over the past 12 years has done to many. To people who are, well, just to people of England, of the UK, in many communities and areas. There's a lot of upset and a lot of poverty, and it's down to how poorly the government is run.
You actually grew up in the same kind of streets, neighbourhood as Marcus Rashford.
Yeah.
Who is also a huge campaigner of bringing people out of poverty and recognising that so much poverty is going on still in places.
Yeah. We have, well, big love to Marcus Rashford, who is, doing the work of many politicians, the work that politicians should be doing.
A couple of years ago, he famously campaigned for free school meals throughout, was it summer, I think, or through lockdown, or I forget the actual campaign itself, but he was...
free school meals for all children during lockdown. That was his big campaign, which, is if something's going seriously wrong, if there's families children who can't afford to eat. And in my area where I grew up, 50% of children live in poverty. 50% of my area, children are living in below the poverty line, which I just think is a shocking statistic for a country that is meant to be one of the richest in the world. No, we shouldn't have to live like that. People shouldn't have to live like that when there is clearly money available.
How does writing on these words and putting them out there help you?
I guess I've always had a strong sense of social justice.
You were campaigning on the streets with your mom when you were 3 years old.
Yeah, so I have been brought up in quite a political family. Both my parents, although they're not together, politics has always been a huge part of their lives. So I am, I can't deny that has dripped down to me, and I've got it from them. But I have always had a huge sense of feeling of social justice, of empathy, and what I believe is clearly wrong or right in terms of the way that there should be more equality than there is. So yeah, we're very political. I guess, right, in terms of the question. So writing about it and sharing it is just a way of getting a message out. I do it because people are likely to engage with poetry. In lockdown, it was easier because there was a lot to be. Many people were angry at the government, so it was good to highlight all the things that were going wrong. But it's just another form of protest. And I think protest is one of the most significant movements you can do to spread social justice or spread awareness about things that are happening.
And you've taken a lot of inspiration from other poets that come before you.
Yeah.
You've written a few poems that have been inspired by suicide in the trenches.
Oh, yeah.
A poem by Siegfried Sassoon.
Yeah.
That kind of translates to more
modern day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started doing, I wrote them ones. Again, like I said,
I suppose we should first of all point out the poem Suicide in the Trenches.
Yeah.
What is it exactly about? It's a short poem, but what does it encapsulate in that poem itself?
About World War II and, the mental trauma that soldiers went through during that time. And I guess it resonates, we put such like you mentioned earlier about war poetry, we put such an emphasis on looking back at that time, and at our heroes and what people went through for our country. But you can apply that now. People are dying, people are at war every day, for different reasons, metaphorically or in terms of at war with their minds, at war with, war still exists, literally. And yet we put such an emphasis on that period of time when we have to look at how many people are dying today, all the time for different reasons, more than they did in World War II. There are more people being killed in Gaza right now. We have more displaced people than ever before. People are dying of mental illness. People are dying of poverty all the time, and yet we study poems about that time period, but we need people to write about now as well.
Well, let's take an example of one of the poems you wrote that was inspired by that one.
It's not in here.
No,
actually.
It's not in your book. But, do you want your phone?
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
So I think the first one I did was called... The first one I wrote was Suicide in the Tower Block, as opposed to Suicide in the Trenches. But the ones after that was This Is Not a Suicide. And the last one I wrote was in 22. Yeah, suicide was around the time of what Marcus Rashford was campaigning for. I knew of a mother who had 3 sons. To give them food, she would have none. Sadness overwhelmed her through the darkest of days, and she struggled to get by on minimum wage. The price of heating left her cold in tiny walls with damp and mould. Her heart and mind couldn't take the shame, and so her sons never saw her again. You smug-faced Tories with money and health, who cheer on Rishi and his wealth, stay home and pray you'll never know the hell where poor mothers and fathers go.
Well, that's an example of how you've been able to use someone else's words that resonated with you in one way, but to apply your own experiences to that and then use that as a base to refer it to something that is current and in your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was a poem that I just remembered from school. It must have resonated with me from school, that poem. But I think it must have needed updating. I guess I don't realise that I'm using. I guess that can be the same for a lot of people. They don't realise that they've been inspired by something, and then it just comes to them at some point. But my mind, I do struggle to understand the processes that I take when I write or use inspiration or whatever, because I am neurodivergent, so I do have ADHD, and I'm the biggest contradiction. I have a really chaotic mind. And I can, my way of thinking and my mood can change from day to day.
Is this why you don't like writing down poems?
Yeah. I didn't know it was unusual, or I don't know if it. I think there are a lot of artists or creatives that might have a similar process, but I didn't. So I think people are similar in that way. There are creatives who are like me, who don't like to write their poems down. So, but when I tell people, they get often quite shocked or surprised by it. So I did until I wrote a book. I rarely wrote my poetry down, and it just I might jot notes, but I got very, very impatient or very, very bored writing it down. And it was easier for me to just walk around the house and say it in my mind or say it out loud. Or the one that my partner now gets really shocked, he finds really, really strange, is when I'm driving. I come home and I'm like, oh, I've written a poem in my head. And he's like, whilst driving, are you sure that's safe? And I'm like, but I can't explain how reciting words in my mind focuses me more than anything else. If I was left to drive and not have to think about anything, I would probably drift off. It actually makes me able to focus on things around me, and it must be something to do with having ADHD and the way that my mind works, but the way I have to channel or focus my thoughts, because it is different to a neurotypical mind. And I didn't write anything down until I wrote this book. And that was quite a challenge, because I had to remember what I'd written. Fortunately, I'd posted a lot on Instagram that I could go back on, or I'd, performed poems or whatever that I could remember. But so sometimes I know that how some of these are in here aren't how I originally wrote them.
Wow, that's crazy.
Because I don't have any.
But you have no record.
Original copy of them. No, they were just in my mind. And I'd have to go and I'd just say them. I would, think of a poem when I was performing quite frequently. Something would come to me that day. And I'm like, I'm gonna perform. I want to write about this. Like the poem I wrote about Manchester. I wrote that in a day, about the Manchester music scene. I wrote that in a day, and and it's a really long poem, and I'd never written it down.
And because people haven't heard this one, so I whilst researching you, one of the poems that really resonated with me, and I don't think it's for today for you to read, but I can definitely share it online once this gets published. Yeah. You performed and wrote and performed the piece about the music scene in Manchester and its diversity. Yeah, I went to university in Manchester, so when I was watching and listening to these words, it resonated with me so much. It brought back so much memory. It was the ultimate nostalgia of and realizing how lucky and grateful I was to have that part of my life back then, where Manchester was one of the most incredible music scenes in the entire UK, because it has everything. Like, you name a music genre and it has it there. And that is reflected in its clubs and its culture there.
I feel I'm a very proud Mancunian. I feel very, very proud, and I feel very, very fortunate to have grown up surrounded by such culture and such diversity in music and the time in which I was a young person. I mean, if I could choose, I would have definitely gone back to the 90s rave culture, but turning 18 in the late noughties was still an excellent time. But it was like, before we didn't have mobile phone, we didn't take phones out with us to video everything. It was still very much that kind of, you're there for the music and for the community and the friendship. So that poem came to me, and it's definitely one that resonates with people of our age, because a lot of the clubs that I wrote in that poem, it was also as an ode. It's an ode to Manchester scene because we hadn't been able to go out for a long time. It was written throughout the pandemic, and it was just celebrating all the things that we'd lost in that time, that Manchester is so famous for. Pubs and clubs and dancing and streets filled with people having a good time. But I wrote that poem in a day, and I had never written it down, and I knew I wanted to perform it that evening. So I did. I just performed it that evening, having never said it out loud or written it
on the day
before.
you'd written it.
Yeah, I performed it live.
Without it being. This mindset in itself it completely blows my mind. And it kind of just shows, okay, you talked about your neurodivergent, which basically means that you've got a completely different mindset to what is quite a normal mindset.
Yeah.
I imagine school must have been incredibly difficult for you because you didn't fit that kind of category which everyone else fit in. And school probably wasn't built around a mindset like yours.
100%.
Which only ever stifles you from being this creative version of yourself, which you've found later on in life.
Yeah. School was very challenging for me. I was always bright, or what they called gifted and talented, but I was forever berated, or I always had negative comments from teachers, all the time, because they just didn't understand me. I was like, my head of year called me a square peg in a round hole, and but which was a kind of a nicer way of putting it. But other teachers called me arrogant, because I would never concentrate in their lessons. Not that now I know I didn't. It's not that I didn't mean to. I just couldn't. And I always seemed to do okay in my exams. I was always able. I can focus on a timed piece that needs pressure, exam pressure or whatever. But put me in a classroom with many other people talking about something that doesn't relate to me, I find extremely difficult. I was kind of I didn't look the part. I was quite scruffy. I was quite a very, very messy person. I never finished a job, that all them typical traits. And that had a huge impact on me, and it still does to this day, really, because I've received very negative comments from a very, very young age, even though on the flip side, I was told, you're a really bright person, but nobody really understood or got me. Apart from, I have to give credit to one teacher who girls were not diagnosed with ADHD. They haven't been until recent years. It's been a huge media attention around women with ADHD, which I think is brilliant. Many years women were just diagnosed got the negative comments, or they can't concentrate, or they're rude, or they're arrogant. And then they got later on diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and really now it's found out that actually there's so many women that have ADHD, because it presents very differently in females to males. Males have the much more hyperactive element, and somehow and we still have kind of these gender differences in that the way people are treated, that boys they're allowed more to be hyperactive. Girls, it's not acceptable, or it's strange, or you should sit and be good and behave. But one teacher, we wouldn't have called it ADHD, but she recognized that she called me a non-conformist, and I kind of liked that, because I don't like to conform. I don't like rules very much. I am a bit of a rebel in a sense. But she really honed the skills that I enjoyed, and she was my drama teacher and my media studies teacher. And she got me to perform a lot, and she also got me to write for the school newspaper about why being different is better. so that was great. Yeah.
And you've written about this in your book as well through a poem called My ADHD and Me.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I can just do this one without reading. That's the point of it, I think.
Okay, go for it.
Excuse me, sir. Have you got a pen? Oh no, I forgot my homework again. No, I did hear what you said, but there's just too much going on in this head. Did you see that pigeon attack a crow? Seriously, I've been staring out the window. What's that? You don't want to know? Okay, tell me again. I promise, this time, I'll give it a go. School was cruel. They called me a dreamer, a misfit, a rebel, a right little schemer. Sometimes they were worse and much, much meaner, like she'll fail all her exams and work as a cleaner. But more fool them because I can't see mess. Seriously, you should see me getting dressed. I spend half an hour looking for my dress and I wear odd socks with my Sunday best. The mundane's a struggle. Organising's like a jigsaw puzzle. I try and stay out of trouble, but there's a reason why they call me Mrs. Tumble. I find it hard to concentrate, even with my mates. Miss half the convo because I'm staring into space. I like to say I'm thinking of the stars, but it's usually where my keys are. I wrote this poem while in the car and well, it's not unusual to question how I got this far. Daily life can be a challenge, often asked how do you manage? Losing things, breaking things, you should see the damage. But it ain't all bad. There is an advantage. They say back in the day when we all lived in caves, they needed ones like me to misbehave, be bold, be brave. While the cautious ones stayed at the back, we were the ones leading the pack. Impulsivity brought the food back and we didn't plan it because there's no time for that. I'm urgent, neurodivergent, inattentive, not demented. Why be tidy when the world's in such a mess? It's like my old man said, those considered to be the worst often turn out to be the best. We're thinkers and feelers, creators and doers. We've got spark and rockets in our shoes and we let our minds go wherever they may choose. So I'm sorry, sir, if you think I'm being rude, but I am me and you are you. I wasn't born to conform. I don't want to fit into no social norm. So take your remarks, politely put them up your arse because a one-track education system's an absolute farce. One day, I'll be on stage doing just fine and I won't need your pen. Because it's all in the mind.
I've just witnessed you just recall that completely out of memory. It's not the shortest poem. It's so fitting as well that is the poem that you could just recall from your mind.
Yeah.
It just demonstrates so much of one, your talent, and two, your mindset. I really want to try and dig into what's going on and how are you visualizing these words? It just comes with the flow. Is it just like an actor who's on stage who just kind of knows that they just sit there. I cannot explain to you why it happens, but I think the rhythm a lot of the time, like I say, I have this flow in me, and I'm not a particularly like musical I haven't got any musical talents. But I have a rhythm in me that I think then fits, that I find fits with words. I don't see the words in my mind or anything. It just comes out. It's just there. I can't explain. And that one I know is the poem that really demonstrates that. Well, let's talk about your book.
Yeah.
Bedtime for Overthinkers, a collection of poems by yourself with artwork by your sister.
Yeah.
Beautiful book. Got it in my hands right now.
Yeah.
Lovely prints. And we've heard some of the poems, but there's many, many more.
Yeah.
This must have been a real labour of love.
Yeah.
And a celebration as well of all your work that you put on by being bold enough to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And put something, at least digitally,
yeah, and
going on that adventure, and then realizing that over time, when things build, you could put something onto page.
Well, that's it. My intention was never to write a book. Like I said, I just started writing to process feelings, and then I started performing because that's naturally what I like doing. And then there was people that said, I love that poem. I'd love the words. I'd love to see the words written down. I'd love them in a book. And I went, all right, yeah, that's, I'll think about it. Knowing full well I hadn't written the words down. And then I had more of that, more people saying, oh, you really should publish this. And I was like, but doesn't a publisher, I didn't understand it. Doesn't a publisher need to come and find me or,
That was the old fashioned way, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Things are more fluid now.
Yeah. And then I felt like to think, well, how amazing would it be to have all my poems written in a collection together that I've done and have it there forever? And I thought, well, you don't need to wait to do that. I've written hundreds of poems and I've not written them down. I've got hundreds of poems, but I've not written them down, and I don't have them in collection. But this is there. Once you do it, it's there forever, isn't it? And it's such a memory, and then it can give it to people. And the intention really was just friends and family to have it. But a lot of people I'd kind of got, not, it's weird to say fans, but people who liked certain poems or individual poems or liked a few of my poems, and they really wanted to buy it. And I thought, yeah. But it was hard work. So I had to sit down, and because I decided I was going to self-publish, I thought I'd go down that route because then I could have complete autonomy. It wasn't going to be a very conventional poetry book. It's not in any particular order. And I wanted my sister to do the artwork, and I'm like, right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write them all. I got very bored very easily writing them all down. I have to give props to my partner, Kieran.
This is your ADHD mind.
This is my ADHD mind. It was never going to be a project that I could just sit down and do and say I have it for this date. It was going to take some coming back to. And thank God I've got people who want to help me do the things that I find very challenging, like what they think is the difficult things. This is one of the beautiful things about ADHD, is that challenging things are easy. Simple things are hard.
Okay, explain.
Simple tasks, or what people deem as simple, doing the washing up or putting things in the right place or writing something that you've already written down, doesn't get finished, or you get lost, or you don't come back to it. And that's really challenging for me on a daily basis. I find that really, really hard. But things like writing a poem that people like or performing on stage, I find easy. That's something that I find really, really easy to do. So I've done the hard bit. I've written the poem, but putting it down.
Yeah, I guess the simple bit of actually collating it. You think it would be simple, right? Like you said, you've got hundreds of poems.
I've got it all there, but it's so boring.
You've got this resistance in your mind, right?
It's just such resistance, and I don't have. It's essentially just it's a block. It's a dopamine block. I don't have the correct amount of dopamine to complete a task that is that boring to me. But reciting it, like I just did then, I enjoy. So you started with I used one of those things on your phone that will type it out for you. But actually, I found I got it much quicker if my partner typed it out for me. So he'd sit there and type for me, and he knows my poems off by heart now. Or if I'd recite them to him, that was much more enjoyable. So eventually, we got them all down. And then got them all down. Ones that had huge amounts of mistakes in. And so actually, this isn't the original copy, but the original copy that went out has loads of typos in it, which I thought in a way was quite beautiful. There's only, I think I've printed 50 at first. So there's only about 50. If you've got an original copy, you've got all the ADHD typos in there, which I thought were quite beautiful. I've since going through them and picking up poems, noticed them. So I managed to edit and reprint. And then I just decided that I was going to print it myself. I found a local printer my friend who's also a big poet on the scene said, look, Amy, you don't need to go for a publisher. You've got enough people who enjoy your work. Do it yourself. Go to a local printer, get it printed. And when you do events, just sell it at events on your Instagram. And he was right. I've done, a lot of people have got my poems, and that's all I ever really wanted. I didn't want it to be a big thing or anything. I just wanted people who enjoyed them to have it. And I was going to do a launch, a book launch, and invite all my friends and all people local to me. But I actually was when I was doing most of this, I was pregnant, and my idea was, I was pregnant with my first child. My idea was most of these poems are such from a different part of my life to what I'm in now. Now that I'm a mum, being a mum is just such a different.
Right. It's a whole new chapter of life.
Whole new chapter of my life, and this was, the end of a chapter of quite profound, like heartache and loss and grief, and but also, finding becoming a person, finding happiness in being on my own in an element. And then I met my partner, and we've had a baby, and it's a whole new chapter. So I wanted to get this book out before I had Stevie, and so I had a book launch booked, but she came prematurely. I got quite ill, and she came early, and so I never got to do my book launch. But I was in hospital for 3 weeks prior to the birth, and I ended up making my partner go and print the books, bring them to my hospital bed, and we started selling them from hospital. I said, I've cancelled my book launch, but you can still buy them. I need something to occupy my mind while I'm in hospital for this amount of time. And he said, you're the only person I know who could be so ill, because I had a condition called preeclampsia, and I was really quite ill with it. You could be so ill that they'd still manage to have a bookshop from their hospital bed. And he would every day I would pack them up, write the address on the envelope.
You were in hospital packaging books.
Packaging books. I had like orders.
That is some hustle, that is.
I had orders like piling up by my bed. The midwives were like, what's going on? And then I'd send him to the post office every day to send them off. So that was the idea. But yeah, I managed to release it before she came anyway.
It's wonderful, especially that it does represent a chapter in your life. Mm-hmm. It's also great because I think sometimes the first creative project you have, publishing in its big sense, like this collection, is always the hardest.
Yeah.
But now you've gone through that experience, whatever comes next in your life and the work that you can put together, I hope that in a few years' time there's this second.
There'll be more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
And you'll know what that experience is like and what it means for you, and it won't be as daunting as it was the first time putting it out there.
Yeah.
I'll add a link to the to where people can find your book below.
I noticed you get quite a significant amount of views on your videos and stuff, don't you?
It can vary, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
and a very good quality.
Thanks.
Filming. Yeah, really good. Very talented.
Thanks. It's a collection of a lot of my skills coming together.
Yeah.
This little project.
Yeah.
And it's been great. It's been my baby. It's been nice to see it grow over the year that I've been publishing things. And I'm into my second year now, and I'm trying to got some big ideas. And
have you started having, because how do you choose people that you want on the podcast?
So,
a lot of it was sport. Was it a lot of it to do with running?
Well, if you think of what adventure means in its kind of purest form, a lot of it is people doing physical things, you crossing countries or whatever. But I've also know that adventure is a state of mind.
Yeah.
And it can come in so many other forms. Yeah. It doesn't have to be these grand adventures crossing countries. So, but also it's not just adventures, it's great British adventures. So the podcast is in two halves in a sense. It's celebrating people who have an adventure mindset, who are bold enough to be creative and publish their own work and put it out there in the world, or even just putting their own self out there on social media.
Yeah.
But it also explores my curiosity with great British stories.
Yeah.
And I hope over time to reflect the diversity of this great country I'm lucky to call home, and celebrate that and celebrate people, and it be an uplifter. And even earlier this week, I've been recording a few podcasts, and I had Danny Bent on. He probably will be published by this time it comes out. And he was at a weird stage in his life, and he arrived at the conversation kind of, he's got so much to celebrate, but so much has changed, so much has evolved in his life. And I think in that conversation, I kind of really wanted to try and to celebrate all his achievements and to recognize that and use that to inspire him to go off and do more things and some kind of validation, because I think you sometimes lose that in yourself when you're putting work out there. And you know, we are quite fickle when it comes to social media now. We do need that validation. And I get zero validation from the podcast because there's no comments, there's no likes.
No, it's just people who listen.
So I can get some of that from Instagram and TikTok and things like that, but actually, in its purest form, putting things out on Spotify, people listen, and I will never know that they've listened. And they might like it, and I'll never know that they've liked. No.
Well, that's a bit like having a book. People have got my book. And there are some people who've written to me and said, oh, I loved your book, but other people have just got it. And I don't know if they've read it. I don't know if they've liked anything in it, because you don't just read a book and then go, oh, I'm going to message the author, do you? You just have your book. You've bought the book now.
But they should, shouldn't they?
But they should. I do say that when I post and I've had a nice bit of review or feedback, I say, you don't know what it means to hear that feedback. Yeah, what it means to me, because it does give you that sense of validation or... Yeah, because it's putting your baby out there, isn't it? It's putting yourself out there, and knowing that people like it is nice.
And that's actually a real example of what I've done with you.
Yeah,
I found your work. It resonated with me. There was a lot of curiosity behind that, behind how you were able to formulate those words, which was so poetic. Obviously, that's a poem, and then using that to explore that and hopefully, extend you to new audiences as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, it does. That's why I have to take these opportunities, because someone has, took the time to tell you that that your words meant something to them, and that what else? What is the purpose if that's not, if nothing else, is that people get something. Can relate to you. It's all about connection, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Your book is self-published, but on the back, I notice you've got, I guess, a little kind of publisher stamp almost. Perhaps it's your own publication. Half moon with the word Moonway underneath.
Yeah.
Moon is a word, I guess, which has a lot of importance in your life.
It does.
Am I right in thinking that's a dedication to your friend Faye?
It is my friend Faye Mooney. So obviously her name was the moon. Faye was my best friend, and many of my poems are written dealing and processing with the grief I felt when I lost her. So many of the poems in there are inspired by grief, particularly losing a best friend. So, I mean, it's a particular kind of grief, losing somebody she was 29, someone you've grown up with very, very closely. But them still being so young. So many of the poems are kind of articulating and processing that, or a dedication to her. And so, she'll be a part, I guess. And so I wrote a lot of poems. Like I say, like poems come to me in like hard times, and through that period of time, she was actually murdered in 2019.
Faye was working in humanitarian aid in Nigeria.
Yeah, she worked for an NGO called Mercy Corps, and doing amazing things out there. She'd actually she was working on a hackathon for working for women and in Nigeria, and she was very, very successful at what she did. She was very well loved, but she took a holiday with her boyfriend. She'd met a Nigerian boyfriend. She'd met her boyfriend out there, Matthew, who was Nigerian, and they went on a Easter weekend holiday to somewhere that has been since, deemed as unsafe, but she wouldn't have put herself in a dangerous position. But then, she was caught in a gunfire shootout, which has been, the coroner report says it was a kidnapping, or it was it was like a one-off event, but tragically she was killed with Matthew.
This was caught up in national news.
Yeah.
Such was the severity of what she got caught up in. Many people can experience loss, and the unfortunate consequences of that, but not many people can go through something where there's BBC articles written about it.
No. That was the kind of really crazy thing about when it happened. And I remember thinking, this is Faye. This isn't somebody, this isn't, you don't read about Faye. I shouldn't be reading about Faye in the newspaper about her death, because this is my best friend. That's a really strange experience to go through. And we were, her family had to be, tell people before it became national news, before people found out. So they just heard that their daughter had been killed. And then, get a message from my sister saying, I want people to know before it comes out in the media, because it's coming out within the next couple of days. And that's like, wow, such a different experience, like you say. And then having to deal with all that continuously after losing your daughter or your family member, friend. Yeah, it still also always feels like it's very real, but it also still feels like something that doesn't happen to you. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that's what you'd watch on a film or you would read about it in the paper. It doesn't happen to you.
Always happens to someone else.
It always happens to somebody else, and it doesn't happen to you. And it did. And yeah, very unfair.
This came at a time before you were writing as well.
No, this was after I was living on my own. And then, so I'd had my breakup, and then I'd had a couple of years by myself, and then that happened. So it was like a couple of years of really hard times, really like a lot of trauma from that period of time, my late 20s. When I, just kind of hit at once, and I'd had like the best 20s you could ask for, I guess. And then all of a sudden, some of the darkest things to happen to somebody happened. And so like I said, writing was the only way I got through. That was particularly around the death of Faye. I just found that I couldn't sleep. Grief was just too overwhelming. And if I did sleep, it would just be dreams of Faye and being with Faye and longing for her, and then writing about them and putting it down on paper, or in my head, just to kind of cope, I guess, or get through it, because it was just such a crazy time. She'd been Faye. We'd lived together before she moved away. So my ex-partner, me and Faye shared a flat in London. We moved to London after university. I trained as a teacher in London, and we lived in a flat in Turnpike Lane. And I met her when I was 16 at college, and then before she left to go and live abroad, had spent 2 years living together. And I don't want to, she's just the most amazing person in the world, the most hilarious, one of a kind person. So I'm very thankful I got those 2 years living with her, because I cherish the memories. But I'll never forget the day that she came into my room, sat down and said, "I'm moving to Iraq." I said, "You're moving to Iraq?" She said, "Yeah, I've got a job in Iraq." But she moved to Iraq before. She did a master's in social policy, and she always had a particular interest in countries of conflict. So she moved to Iraq, and then she moved to the Kosovan-Serbian border, and then finally found a job in Nigeria, which she was doing really, really well in, really, really successful. But yeah, she didn't come home.
Many of your writings in your book are about Faye and how you process that. I guess it's hard for me to talk about it with you, but I guess even by using poetry as a coping mechanism for yourself, I imagine no amount of writing could really ever help that loss.
No. No, of course it doesn't. But
did it help you understand your own emotion?
It helped. Yeah, it helped me process it, deal with it in a way. It's such a hard thing to articulate, or I find to articulate, going through something like that. Obviously, everybody has experienced or will experience grief in their life. And we as a nation, we rarely talk about it. I guess I was fortunate up until then to have not lost somebody. But I wasn't prepared. You know, it's a taboo subject almost to talk about. And I think sharing words on how you're feeling about grief and death is very important, because it's a universal feeling, but yet it affects people in different ways, and it is individual depending on the circumstance or the relationship you had. So there was many of us going through the same thing, because we had a huge group of friends that we grew up with, and obviously her mum, her dad, her sister, but we were all experiencing it in our own individual way as well. So it was hard to kind of talk to people about, so even my close friends who were going through the same thing, about what I was feeling, because it impacted me different. I guess I had my own relationship with Faye, so it was hard to like. Obviously, obviously we could, and we shared stories and we're there for each other and things, but also you do go through it quite on your own as well, because your relationship is different. Sorry, I'm getting upset because I just miss her very much. So it was just a way of being able to get that out there and understand my own feelings about the situation. And I decided it is obviously it's not a situation that you hear all the time. It's a very quite shocking series of events, but I put them in this poem because I'm so proud to have been Faye's friend, and I want to forever people to ask me about her, even however hard it is. I will want to speak about her for the rest of my life. And one of the really important things for me was that her family really, really appreciated it. I didn't know, like I said about grief, in terms of like you experience it on your own and you don't know, almost in a sense, if you should be feeling these feelings, if other people, and because of the certain relationships you have, different relationships, like I can't, relate. I can't imagine what it was like for them. We're very close still now, her and family. But knowing that they appreciate that I wanted to put the words out about their daughter and put them out there for people to read and see was a huge validation, or I really appreciate that. Meant so much to me.
For many people, can be quite hard to put into words.
Yeah.
What they are feeling.
Yeah.
And processing their own emotion. Or even working out how best to talk to someone about grief. Yeah.
And I guess poetry can be a starting point for that, that was, like I said, that was kind of the first experience, and it was such a huge experience, like a monumental loss to me, of grief. But since I've had close friends who have gone through similar experiences, or lost a parent or someone close to them, and I find that I'm able to approach them and talk to them and help them in a way, since my own personal experience. And I guess words on a page can be a starting point or a way of doing that. I've since sharing poems that helped me understand grief and things can be easier sometimes than talking about it. I guess that's the beauty of poetry, isn't it? It is, life is, I guess, without wanting to sound like a typical poet or whatever, life is poetry in a way, love and loss and relationships and everything that is the essence of poetry, and it is meant to be helpful.
It's bittersweet.
Yeah, life is a roller coaster.
You have a poem about that.
Yeah.
But I think actually maybe while we're on the topic, is there a poem specifically about Faye or your experience with Faye you'd like to share with us now that you think?
Yeah. That I have. I mean, there's, like I said, there was many, but I think if we're talking about how grief affected me, or finding out about Faye had affected me, then Replay is what I will read today. It's quite I toyed with the idea of putting it in the book because it is quite I do think it's quite a harsh. I do think it's quite a very hard-hitting poem in ways, and quite specific. But yeah, I guess it's the one that really articulates how I was feeling. Yeah. Stuck in reverse. Now I only see backwards. Until that day, my life was moving forwards, but I have no drive anymore. Life is not as I knew it before. That day, the air became so thick, I suffocated with it. There's no way to choose how to receive such news, but a text message left me bruised, black and blue. You died. And at the same time, I swear so did I. Differently, I know I'm still breathing, but I don't believe in life. So dead was I didn't feel, like my heart lied, like it bled, but only so little I could pretend it wasn't real till the shakes came. The aches and pains as my heart breaks, shattered on that kitchen floor and never put back in its place. There's a pain that never goes away, so I let it replay. Over and over in all its different ways, never the same until I shoo it away, like unwanted rain. I put up my umbrella, but there's a hole, seeping water straight through to my soul. I drown. And the only way to stop me from sinking deeper and deeper down is to think of your face and make it my aim to go backwards. Retrace, replace, embrace every moment leading to that day. 'Cause if I'd known, I would have held on to that face, stared into those moons you had for eyes, soaked in their light, so that every time I looked into the skies, I could be sure you weren't so out of reach. A lesson only grief can teach. Moments like that day on a Californian beach where we, carefree, let sand slip silently through our hands, like time only truly exists in the mind. There is no rewind. Yet I find it's the only way to keep us both alive.
You said at the beginning it was hard hitting, but actually I think sometimes when it can be hard to talk about something in like in a conversation with what we're doing now, you've been able to really encapsulate everything.
Yeah, it's true.
In words. And
it was simply hard, like the worst unimaginable thing that could happen. So it's only the truth, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah.
I think you're so afraid sometimes of being like too much or something, but that is your experience, and other people will experience it, or other people do want to share in that. So yeah.
We've not mentioned this yet, I guess, but I guess there's two forms of your creative sides. There's the poetry. We've talked to an extent about that, and I've loved listening to all your poems. But there's another side of you which came about more recently that has taken you on a whole different adventure in life. And that's when you decided to become a celebrant.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, an officiator of events that might be like a wedding or a funeral.
Yeah. Big life events.
Big life events.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, you have funeral celebrants. They've been used for quite a long time. But wedding celebrants are more of a recent thing that many people I find a bit confusing. They don't really know what it is. But in like modern times, people don't want to have a traditional wedding. They want to have a wedding that's more meaningful and more personal to them, and that's without the kind of legal jargon that you would get from a registrar, or the religious jargon you'd get from a vicar or a priest. So people choose to have celebrants who write and officiate just as a registrar would, but they're allowed to write something extremely personal and meaningful for the couple. And also it means that they don't have to get married in a building. They can get married wherever they want, effectively. Not officially in England, unfortunately. But it acts as a...
Right. Some people still get the official thing done on a small scale, and then have the big events and bring a celebrant in.
So that's it. So how it would work. In Scotland, it's different. They have celebrants are able to legally marry. But in England and Wales, we've not managed to get that legislation yet. But the idea is that a couple will register separately. So they might have a small they might just go to a registry office with a witness, or they might have a small wedding there.
Yeah,
ceremony
it's so
there.
common now with couples, isn't it?
Yeah.
They do the legal thing privately.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then
they'll have a huge celebration where they might hire a celebrant to be a part of that. And they'll have a ceremony as though it was, a traditional wedding. Or they'll have it in a completely unique way, and the celebrant will officiate that. And so I first was introduced to celebrancy. Around that year that Faye passed, obviously she had an amazing celebrant at her funeral, and then I had a few weddings for friends because we were getting into our 30s, and it was the time when many of my friends were getting married, and they had celebrants at their weddings, and I thought, wow, this is much more interesting and less boring. The ceremony is much more interesting. Everyone, ceremonies often they want to wait for the party or whatever, but they were really engaging and meaningful. And my friend said to me, this is what you should do. This has got your name all over it. And I thought, yeah, I would like that. I like getting to know people. I like writing. I love performing. And I think the most important times in people's lives, such as celebrating your relationship and love with your friends, celebrating someone's life, or a naming ceremony, a new life, is so important to people. It needs to be full of colour and interesting and meaningful and personal. And I thought I could do that. So I did. I embarked on a journey of being a celebrant. And yeah.
You've described it as the best job in the world.
Yeah.
Why?
Because
I guess everyone's happy if you're doing a wedding.
If you're doing a wedding. So wedding, yeah. But even with the celebrant, even at the funerals that I've done, to know that I have celebrated somebody's life and brought joy to, because I think the idea of a funeral, I think people want to celebrate people for who they were. And if I can do that for a family, then that's so important to me. But weddings are a huge joy because everyone's happy, but I get to write about love, and I get to know a couple and their unique story. I love stories. I love people a bit like yourself. I love hearing stories about people, and if I can write that into something that is memorable for them, or that they can keep forever, or is meaningful, then that's perfect to me. It's scary. It's a big job, and it can be quite hard sometimes.
And it's this couple's most important day of their life.
It's a lot of pressure. It's the most important day of their life. And sometimes, and also everybody's different. So I've had such different personalities in the weddings that I don't know. Some are really easygoing and laid back. some are like the most organised couples ever. And I don't know, sometimes it's really hard to know if I'm doing the right thing, if this is what they want, or, you know, getting it right for that couple. And so it can be quite like, oh, I hope this goes well. But thankfully, I've always had couples that have said, been very grateful for what I've managed to create, what we've managed to create together.
You said because once people are legally married, they can then have the ceremony whenever they want.
Mm-hmm.
You've certainly been in some incredible locations. I've seen you on the side of a mountain in Snowdonia, in Scotland as well, outside in nature, in the most beautiful spot, which makes those wedding photos look so unique and vibrant.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you just go and get? I mean, it's whatever's best for you. But if you do love nature and you're an outdoorsy person, why wouldn't you go and get married on somewhere that is meaningful to you? Because you can just take a group of people and have a celebration in a place that suits you. And there's some of those picturesque places, like you say. The lake in Snowdonia was absolutely perfect. We just had to climb. We had to do a little climb to it. There was a couple that got married on Cat Bells in Lake District, and that's because that's somewhere they walked often.
Wow, that's very special. Yeah, so unique to them. Yeah.
Unique to them. Yeah, everyone just took, and also it makes it, you know, it's kind of like this rustic element, I guess. But you can just take a chair. You don't have. It doesn't have to be this big fancy wedding. It can just be in its purest form about you and why you've chosen each other. And that's what I hope to bring to it. But also why people have decided to go down this route of creating a wedding that really captures them.
So why should people consider booking you as their celebrant compared to any other celebrant out there? Now's your chance to sell yourself.
Yeah,
we've already heard your beautiful poetry, and this is something you incorporate within your ceremony.
Well, there's that. I'm currently writing a wedding for a couple who want the ceremony in spoken word, which is an interesting take on it, and it's actually been very fun to do. And I think that it's going to be very memorable. But typically I don't write in poetry, but I offer a personalised poem as well that you can have as a keepsake. But I think essentially if you're listening to this and you're thinking you've never thought about having a celebrant for a wedding, or if anything that I've said about creating something that is so personal and poignant and meaningful to yourselves, then I can do that with you. I have tons of ideas that, you know, with like sort of symbolic gestures and rituals and locations and themes, you know, or if you want something that's lighthearted and humorous, I love that. Or if you want something more romantic, and I can do that as well. That's the beauty of having a celebrant. We can create something that it fits you and your vibe as a couple. And I think one of the things that I often get from my feedback from couples is that I make the process very comfortable. So, you know, I'm not just there acting as a celebrant on the day. I'm there throughout the whole kind of planning of your wedding, and there to bounce ideas off. And obviously I could build great relationships with couples, and yeah, I'm someone to lean on when things get a bit overwhelming, and I think that they really appreciate. I think that's an element that people don't expect from a celebrant, but that's what they get, is somebody that is there to support you through the planning and the process of having your big day.
Certainly sounds like quite the adventure.
Yeah.
You've opened my eyes to kind of how to make a wedding so much more unique. Because so much of it is so draped in tradition. But actually what is happening, and you've probably seen in the last kind of few decades, is that everything is kind of opening up and more fluid, and people are kind of realizing that they can be really creative with what they can do, and that's so exciting itself, and where that can lead.
It also takes marriage on a different. Marriage is like the idea of marriage and traditional is that you kind of are married. It's a conventional thing, and then you get married to the state almost. You know, it's a religious or a legal thing, but actually, you want to celebrate love, and you want to celebrate our connections and people, and that's what having a celebrant highlights more than those things. Takes the tradition out, like you said, out of it, and makes it unique and personal. And that is what every relationship is. It's unique and it's personal.
Yeah. And actually, really, so much of a traditional wedding is focused on the religion.
Yeah.
And, you know, the vows are not just to each other, it's also to whichever God that you're worshipping.
Yeah.
But this kind of strips that away and actually says it's just purely about these two people coming together, and and that's the focus.
Who've made a commitment to each other, who've decided that they want to spend however long together, you know, the rest of their lives, hopefully. And, you know, as a celebrant, as an independent celebrant, we can incorporate, if tradition and religion and culture is really important to you, we can absolutely do that. We can incorporate whatever is meaningful to you. You know, you might have, and now because we are diversified, you know, we're having mixed cultures, marrying, etc. We can do elements of different cultures within the wedding, and that, you know, it doesn't have to be focused on one religion or one culture. It can have elements of each other's differences, exactly whatever they may be, and that's the beauty of it.
I want to close things with a poem. Mm-hmm. Let's close this one with Lemons. Is that what it's called? Lemons?
Lemons, yeah.
It's it's definitely a popular poem of yours.
It's a very popular poem. Yeah, it's funny how the ones that you don't think will be are often like, you don't write them thinking, oh, they're particularly great or whatever, but people really, sometimes the simplest ones are the ones that people like the most. Lemons. When life gives you lemons and the lemons make you sour, when the plants in your home no longer look like flowers, when the sugar in your tea doesn't make it sweet, when your trusty woolly socks no longer warm your feet, when the days are long and the skies are dark, it's hard to recharge, you're missing your spark, all hope feels lost and it's hard to remember. Time moves on, nothing lasts forever. The clouds will clear, the sun always comes out. Your fire will reignite from this temporary burnout. So as the seasons change and you grow with each day, just breathe, my friend. It won't always be this way.
Fabulous. We've heard only a small selection of the poems in your book, Bedtime for Thinkers. I really hope that if anyone has loved anything, that they will go out and purchase your book, because I think it's great always to support small creators. So I really look forward to what is going to be the next chapter and the next version of a book, and the emotions and the journey that you'll have gone on, processing so many other things in your life, including being a parent as well.
Motherhood.
Yeah.
I think that brings a whole new perspective. Well, it does. There's no doubt about that. It brings a whole new perspective to life and a whole new priority. So yeah, maybe that's part of it, or aging. I'm not young anymore.
But I guess the beauty is you don't know. These things are going to come to you. We don't know what's around the corner in life anyway.
That's it. You don't, and that's very true. You don't know what's happening. You don't know what's going to happen next.
Well, whatever happens next, I can't wait to continue absorbing your work and being inspired as well by your words as well.
You're going to write a poem.
Now that you've said that to me, I can't say no, can I? Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll put that out there.
Yeah.
I have sometimes these things with people on this conversation where I'll say, yeah, I'll do this. And I do hold myself accountable for it.
Okay.
I really am into making like real connections. So I will.
Thank you.
I will find a space in my mind that needs to come out.
I love that.
And, you know, I can't say when, but I imagine by the end of this year, I will send you something.
Yes. I look forward to reading it.
Great. Well, if that is not inspiration to anyone listening to write that one poem, then I don't know what is.
Do it.
Thanks ever so much, Amy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find. And I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.